gentlemen, for joining us. First up, round one. 2 states or no state at all. Is a 2-state solution still viable, or is that just a fantasy politicians cling to? First up, Scott.
I mean, the 2-state solution is something that has been in the works since the issue of Israeli statehood and what to do with the Palestinians has been raised. Go back to the partition of 1947-48. The goal was to have an Israeli state, a Palestinian state. And we've seen that process has been disrupted, unfulfilled, whether it's the partition in 1947, Oslo in 1993, Taba in 2001, Annapolis in 2007, or what is passing for negotiations for the Palestinians today. It's an ideal. The problem is you need both sides to agree to a solution. On the Israeli side, we have Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, clearly articulating to the president of the United States that he opposes a Palestinian state of any kind in a post-conflict environment. So no matter how this conflict ends, this current conflict in Gaza ends, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, the government of Israel, is in opposition to a 2-state solution, a Palestinian state. This makes it very difficult to proceed from that point. On the Palestinian side, my problem, and I'm just going to be very frank here, is who speaks for the Palestinians? Is it Fatah? Is it the Palestinian Authority? Is it Hamas? Is it some other Palestinian entity? It makes it difficult to speak about the practicality of a Palestinian state when it's difficult to say who would be governing. Today, recognized as, at least internationally, as the legitimate governing authority is the Palestinian Authority. But I think Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, has zero credibility amongst the Palestinian people today, and maybe even less credibility abroad. He's seen very much as an extension of the Israeli government and not a true leader of the Palestinian people. And I guess I'll wrap it up by saying this. Very few people today believe that the 2-state solution is a viable solution. Most people speak of a 1-state solution. That is a melding of Jewish populations, Muslim populations, Christian populations into a singularity called Palestine. Well, this is unacceptable to the Israelis, to the Jews of the region, and I think it's unrealistic at this point in time. So I'm left to conclude that while I firmly believe in the right of a Palestinian state to exist, I can't sit here and answer your question by saying that a 2-state solution is the viable path for that to manifest itself.
Thank you. Professor Dershowitz.
I'm not sure we're going to have much of a debate. I agree with 90% of what Mr. Ritter said. I agree with the history that Israel agreed to a 2-state solution in 1947. It agreed to a 2-state solution in 1948. It offered essentially a 2-state solution in 1967. The Clinton parameters offered the Palestinians 96% of the West Bank plus 4% of Israel plus the entire Gaza in 2000-2001. Olmert offered even more in 2007, and the response of the Palestinian leadership has always been no negotiation, no peace, no recognition, and the responses have been intifada. So I don't see how the Palestinians have ever come close to accepting a 2-state solution. I had dinner with Abbas. I've met him on several occasions, but I had a very quiet dinner with him a few years ago. And I asked him point blankly, would you ever recognize Israel as the Jewish state? And he said, absolutely not, under no circumstances. I said, would you ever recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, something more descriptive? And he said, well, maybe at some point down the line I could do that. At that point, Saab Arkat, who was sitting next to him, kind of punched him in the chest and said, no. So although I support a 2-state solution, I have since 1967, I wrote my first article supporting a two-state solution. In 1970, I supported it in a debate with Noam Chomsky in the early 1970s. It's an ideal. A one-state solution is impossible because who gets the nuclear weapons if you have a one-state solution? Obviously, the Jewish state of Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, is not going to give its Arab population access to its weapons system that are the only guarantee of Israel's survival. The only reason Israel survives at all today is because it has overwhelming military strength, more than all the Arab armies combined. That was proved in 1948, and it was proved again on October 7th, a year ago. We know what Hamas would have done had they been able to conquer Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They would have engaged in genocide, rape, beheadings, etc. So Israel must maintain its superior military force, and hopefully it will move toward the possibility where you can have a peaceful Palestinian state living next door to a nation state of the Jewish people, and they can both thrive. The Palestinian people are absolutely wonderful. They're innovative, they're creative, they're intellectual. Can you imagine what would happen if both sides were able to beat their swords into plowshares and make peace? That's my hope.
Thank you, sir. Scott, rebuttal?
Again, I think Professor Dershowitz and I are going to have trouble pounding our heads against one another. But let me offer this. Again, we don't disagree on the historical framework, but I would say that, it's very difficult to talk about a Palestinian legitimacy in 1947 when David Ben-Gurion acknowledges they began, the Nakba, the cleansing of the Palestinians. Oslo in 93, they didn't talk about a Palestinian state, but an interim self-governing authority. The Israeli nation, this militarized nation, has been envisioned from the very start through, Theodore Herzl as a colonial enterprise. They are occupiers of Arab land, and this is very problematic in terms of how do we craft a two-state solution or a one-state solution. And I would just leave this. If Professor Dershowitz's only objection is nuclear weapons, I would offer up the South African solution where the white apartheid state voluntarily got rid of their nuclear weapons in order to create a singularity known as the Republic of South Africa today.
And that brings us to the next question, however. Occupation or defense? Is Israel exercising its right to defend itself or enforcing a controlling regime over Palestine? Professor Dershowitz, you first.
Well, the two biggest myths are that Israel started as a colonial enterprise and that it started its state through a Nakba. Israel is the most anti-colonial state that exists almost anywhere in the world. It was established through ending colonialism. There was Turkish colonialism, the Ottoman Empire had fought against that. There was British colonialism. The Irgun blew up the head of the colonial regime with King David Hotel. Israel fought so hard against colonialism. It was a return to a land that was Jewish, Judea, Samaria. That's Judaism is named after Judea. There has always been a Jewish presence in what the Romans called Palestine, but really had no inherent status as a state. There's never been a Palestinian state. There's always been a Jewish state. In 1830-something, when they did the first religious population of the Middle East, it turns out there was a substantial majority of Jews living in Jerusalem. And the second largest group, by the way, were Christians. And only the third largest group were Muslims. So there is no colonialism. Absolutely not. There is a dispute over land that has been historically Jewish, had Arab population, and has always been subject to potential division. Then comes the Nakba. The Nakba was completely the fault of the Palestinians. The Israelis accepted the division of Palestine in 1947, 1948 into a tiny, tiny little land where the Jewish population would be on the coastal plain in what would be like 30% of the arable land of what is now Palestine, and 70% would have been Arab. And had the Palestinians and the Arab countries accepted that, there would have been no Nakba. There would have been 50% of Haifa would be Arab, and probably much of the rest of the country. But the Arab armies invaded Israel, and Israel, in self-defense, obviously did not allow the Arabs who fled to come back. If that's the Nakba, it's a pretty weak Nakba, and it's a Nakba that clearly was imposed by Palestinian leadership. The last thing Israel wants ever to do is to occupy anybody else's land. For the last almost 100 years, all they've wanted is their ability to live in peace in a tiny sliver of land, which could be the only nation state of the Jewish people anywhere in the world. And over again, they've been attacked mercilessly through terrorism, through threats of annihilation, now through threats of nuclear annihilation. So, no, this is not an occupation. This is completely self-defense. It's much like what the Germans had to endure after the end of the Second World War. You don't just give back the land. You wait until there's the end of belligerency. And under international law, belligerency has to end before the military could leave a country that was captured during wartime. So no colonialism, no Nakba, no occupation, all self-defense.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter, you are up next.
One of the problems with this this line of inquiry on your part is that it creates a black and white notion that doesn't exist in reality. History is a very complicated thing. I would just say that Theodor Herzl in 1896 wrote a book called Der Judenstaat, in which he clearly defined Zionism as a colonial activity. And David Ben-Gurion, the founding father of Israel, speaks in colonial terms when he speaks of the seizure of lands from the Arabs. He's unapologetic about it, but he does mention that that which would be unlawful in peace would be tolerated in war. So he speaks about taking the high ground, taking the mountains through war, through an act of war. And here, Professor Dershowitz is 100% correct. When you engage in war and you lose, you pay the price. And unfortunately for the Palestinians, for the Arabs, they have habitually lost, and it makes it difficult to articulate that Israel must surrender that which it has conquered in time of war. Occupier or, defender. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. It comes down to a point of view. Clearly, David Ben-Gurion articulated numerous times during the foundation of the State of Israel that he understood that the Israelis were occupiers, that they had seized the lands of the Arabs. And he often said, I don't blame them for hating us because we took their land. But again, the taking of the land was through the conduct of war. To pretend that the Arab armies didn't invade Israel in 1947-48 is to be wrong. I mean, this is why I say this is a far more nuanced argument than just simply black and white, right or wrong. But today, I think when we speak of Gaza, when we speak of the West Bank, when we speak of the unconquered territories, Israel clearly is the occupier. International law has found that is the case. The International Court of Justice has found that this is the case, and that the Palestinians are the resistance fighters. Now, from the perspective of Israel, the Palestinian resistance fighters become terrorists because of the tactics that are used, etc. But from the perspective of the Palestinians, they are resistance fighters. The Israelis are the occupiers. This is one of the problems we're going to have with the creation of a two-state solution. There is no agreement on anything between the Palestinians and the Israelis, especially when it comes to who is right and who is wrong, who is the occupier, who is the defender.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dershowitz, rebuttal, 1 minute.
Yes, you referred to Herzl's Der Judenstaat. This is the original copy of Der Judenstaat. I own that copy. It's one of the great treasures of my collection. And if you go through it, he is not in favor of colonialism. He's fighting colonialism. He's using colonialism. He's going to meet with the head of the Ottoman Empire. He's going to meet with the head of Germany in order to end the occupation and allow the Jewish people to return to their homeland. Now, in terms of occupation, let's be very, very clear. Israel offered to end the occupation completely and totally in 2001. In 2005, Gaza, they did end it. In 2007. So when you've offered to end the occupation, and only in recognition of peace, and the other side says, no, don't end the occupation. We're going to continue to fight you. We're going to continue to terrorize you. You cannot call that an occupation. I don't care what any international court, which is biased, says. Israel offered to end the occupation. The Palestinians rejected it. That's not an occupation.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter, next question is for you. Who is winning this war, if anyone? On the battlefield, in public opinion, or in diplomacy? Is either side actually gaining ground, or both losing, just differently?
Such a philosophical question. Whoever wins a war. Let's just be frank. War is about death and destruction. War is about human beings taking human lives. It doesn't matter who believes they're right, who believes they're wrong. People are going to die. And so I would say to the Israelis who have died, it doesn't matter who won. To the Palestinians who have died, it doesn't matter who've won. They've been killed. Their lives are terminated. Whatever hopes and dreams they had are gone with them. War is an extension of politics by other means. Anybody who's studied war, Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, understands this, which means that you have to judge military victory in terms far different than simply what has been achieved on the battlefield. I would say right now that Hamas started a campaign on October 7th from a position where it was in danger of being made irrelevant. The Abraham Accords were about to be finalized. Israel was about to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking in very idealistic terms about the creation of an India-Middle East economic corridor that was going to be a game changer economically for Israel. And this would have led to the total isolation of the Palestinian people and given the predilection of the Likud and Netanyahu, meaning there was no chance, a viable chance for a meaningful Palestinian state. October 7th changed this. Whether you agree with Hamas's tactics or not is irrelevant. They changed the debate and they put Israel on the defensive. Israel today is fighting a international court of justice that has made decisions that the Israelis disagree with, but decisions that are embraced around the world. We see people articulating in support of a Palestinian state who otherwise hadn't been. We see the United Nations taking up this issue. We see it a debate here in the United States that never before existed. And so politically, I would say that Hamas has actually emerged in a stronger position today than they were on October 6th. Economically, Israel is not where it wants to be. This war has been very damaging to Israel. Nasrallah's ongoing naval blockade has crippled the port of Eilat. It's crippled the Israeli economy. And then domestically, Israel is divided, fundamentally divided because of the hostage issue. Netanyahu's viability is being questioned. And so I would say Israel has emerged weaker. But then the question is, where has Hamas emerged? And I would say that while militarily Hamas may be able to, brag about victories, the devastation inflicted on the civilian population cannot allow one to talk about a victory. The devastation of Gaza is not that which takes place on a victorious power. I come back to my original premise. Nobody wins in a war. Both sides have lost.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dershowitz?
Countries win wars, countries lose wars. Nazi Germany and fascist Japan lost their wars. Not only that, but the defeat of Nazi Germany also meant the defeat of a philosophy, the philosophy of Nazism. There are only Nazis that are left today are on a few American university and European university campuses. Nazism is dead. It was defeated by the heroism of the United States and Great Britain and other countries. And Israel has militarily been winning this war. It has destroyed Hezbollah, it has destroyed Hamas. With the help of the United States, it's going to destroy the Houthis, and it has weakened enormously Iran, making them subject to the possibility that their nuclear ambitions could be thwarted either by diplomacy or by military means. So yes, wars are won and wars are lost. The people who die, of course, always lose the wars. But this is a war of self-defense for the Israelis. Let's remember that every single war that Israel fought, essentially wars, real wars, was started by the enemies. The 1947-48, the Palestinians invaded Israel. All the Arab armies together tried to destroy the new state of Israel. In 1967, the Egyptian army massed on the border and threatened to destroy Israel along with Syria. Fortunately, Israel was able to take preemptive action, but only after they blocked the Gulf, in which became a casus belli, an act of war. 1973 was a surprise attack by Egypt on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. And of course, October 7th. My distinguished opponent says, whether one agrees with October 7th or not, I don't think you really mean that. I don't think anybody could agree that it's an appropriate act of war to rape and mutilate and behead and kidnap children and babies and murder them. Even the most aggressive proponents of warfare would not agree with that. What Hamas did on October 7th is, in a mini manner, the equivalent of what the Nazis did between 1941 and 1945. And if they had their way, they would have done what the Nazis did 1941 to 1945. So you can't just create equality when there is inequality. The Arab leadership is responsible for the vast majority of the plight of the Palestinian people today. They could have had a state in 47, 48. They could have had a state 2000, 2001. They could have had a completely independent Gaza in 2005. They could have had a state in 2007. The problem is the Palestinians have never wanted a state. There isn't a single demonstration on a college campus anywhere in the world that calls for the two-state solution. They only call for the end of Israel. So the two-state solution is not something that the radical anti-Israels and Hamas wants. The Hamas Charter is explicitly opposed to a two-state solution. Their goal is ending the nation-state of the Jewish people. Don't expect any country to accept that.
Thank you, sir. Scott, rebuttal?
Again, I'm not here to quibble, and I don't think Professor Dershowitz is either. Yes, I agree that we don't see too much talk about a two-state solution today on college campuses, and we hear a lot of talk about the eradication of Israel. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that the Israeli government today speaks of the eradication of Palestine. When the Israeli government invokes Amalek, calls the Palestinians human animals, and carries out artificially intelligence-directed targeting, Lavender, the Gospel, that have created casualty ratios acceptable of 1 to 15. Nobody who deals with proportionality accept that 1 to 100. No one deals with that. Israel has had military victories, but the Israeli military itself acknowledges that on October 7th, Hamas won. Hamas beat the Israeli army in a stand-up fight, and the Israeli army performed poorly.
I agree.
Thank you, sir. All right. Professor Dershowitz, next question for you, sir. Is Netanyahu the right leader for peace, or is it just about power? Can Netanyahu deliver a lasting peace in the region, or has his leadership made resolution even harder to imagine? Sir?
It's not an issue for us to decide. It's an issue for the Israeli people to decide. Israel is a vibrant democracy. They've had, 5 elections in the last 8 years. There's no more democratic country anywhere in the Middle East and very few in the world. Newspapers in Israel are vehemently opposed to Netanyahu, but he's been elected. So he is the person who is in charge of making peace, for better or worse. You might ask me, would I vote for him if I were an Israeli? I'm not an Israeli, so I'm not going to answer that. There are voices in Israel that are extreme. Yes, some call the Palestinians Amalek. Amalek is a biblical reference to a group of people who attacked the weakest women and children of Israel. And the Bible says, never forget Amalek. But the vast majority of Israelis would accept a two-state solution, would accept living in peace if there were a Palestinian leadership and a Palestinian people that really wanted peace. When you look at the two-state solution, look at a city like Ramallah. I've been to it many times. I've visited with the heads of the Palestinian Authority there. It is a Palestinian state, a mini-state on the West Bank. There are no Jews there. There's no Israeli army. There's no Israeli police. The food is better than in Jerusalem. The buildings are more beautiful. There are more fancy cars and electronic shops than there are in Jerusalem. It is a mini-state. If the rest of the West Bank and Gaza were like Ramallah, we could have a two-state solution. And maybe that's the way to build a two-state solution. Start with Ramallah, then move to Jericho, then maybe a couple of other states that could be cities that could be the basis. You know, a state gets built from the bottom up. They once asked Winston Churchill in the beginning of the 19th century, should there be a Jewish state in Israel? He said, should there be? There already is. They have universities, they have newspapers, they have political parties, they have disagreements, they have culture centers. So that's the way you build a state. You don't build it by getting Canada to recognize it or the United Nations to recognize it. That doesn't help build the state. So I'm hoping that the Palestinian leadership, we can get a new leadership, a leadership that is more interested in the Palestinian people than in destroying the Israeli people. But until we get that, until Golda Meir's wish comes true, Golda Meir said, we will have peace when the Palestinians love their children more than they hate our children. And as she also said in a related way, we can perhaps forgive them somehow for killing our children, but we will never forgive them for making us kill their children. The deep desire for peace, even though it's been challenged by events like October 7th, still runs through the Jewish people and the Arab people and the Christian people of Israel, if only you give peace a chance. But the Palestinian leadership has never given peace a chance.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter?
I'm going to start off by, again, agreeing with Professor Dershowitz. Netanyahu is an Israeli problem, and it requires an Israeli solution. But I would also say that Netanyahu is an American problem, because Netanyahu's misgovernance and what I believe are the crimes that he has authorized to be committed in the name of Israel against the Palestinian people has put his closest ally, the United States, in a very difficult predicament. We have domestic political issues because of this. This Palestinian issue has confronted the United States with questions of free speech and freedom of association and due process that, again, Professor Dershowitz knows the Constitution better than me, but we are having debates in this country that I don't believe we should be having, because the issues of civil rights and civil protections should be unchallengeable, but they're being challenged today because of the question of Israel, Palestine, and where does the United States place its weight behind. I think free speech is free speech. I condemn the KKK and its racism, but I would never suppress those who speak out in favor of the racism, because I believe that the better ideas went out, and I can easily come up with ideas that trump any racist idea that the KKK has. And I would like to believe that people who support the state of Israel, rather than silencing voices who speak out in support of Palestine, would say, let them speak, let them be heard, and then we will let the strength of our argument win out. But this has been damaging to America, and that's Netanyahu's fault. It's been damaging to America abroad. Our diplomats have spoken about the isolation of America internationally because of our unquestioned support for Israel. So this has been harmful to America. And I would also say now for Israel. Look, Professor Dershowitz, I don't have your experience. I yield to you. But I did spend 4 years working with the Israelis in the 1990s, hunting down Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, working with Israeli intelligence to eliminate that threat to the state of Israel. And I gained a deep appreciation for the Israeli state, for the Israeli people. I lived in Israel. I worked with the Israelis. And at that time, I could easily say that I supported the Israeli state. I was a big fan of Yitzhak Rabin, and I cried when he was murdered. But I've watched Israel change since that time. And the Israel that exists today is not an Israel that I can support, Netanyahu has created a morally indefensible nation. And so I can't speak out in favor of the continued existence of Israel as it is currently manifested. But again, I come back to supporting you. The solution is with the Israeli people, Israeli democracy. And the Israeli people will have to stand up, look in the mirror and say, is this the face of Israel that we want to see projected to the world? And I'm hoping that the majority of the Israeli people will look in the mirror and say, no, it is not. And they will solve the Netanyahu problem.
Professor Dershowitz, your response?
Well, you described the Netanyahu problem was caused completely by the Palestinian leadership. I, too, was a great friend and admirer of Yitzhak Rabin. And what happened is the Israelis wanted peace desperately, and then the Intifada began, and the murders began, and the Israelis moved a little bit more to the right. And when Soviet Jewry left and 800,000 people who had been oppressed by socialism moved to Israel, Israel moved to the right. So Israel has changed, but the change has largely been a function of the fact that it's been attacked and that the peace process, efforts to make peace, I think the biggest change was the failure to accept the Barack-Clinton parameters of 2000. I think we would have had a peace. Now, I agree with you. I want free speech, but free speech, and I support it. By the way, Harvard will not allow me to come and speak on behalf of Israel, so there's no free speech really at Harvard. But you talk about the KKK, but none of us would support mass KKK people harassing black students. And that's what's happened. Mass Hamas supporters, the equivalent of the KKK, have been harassing and preventing Jewish students from going to class. That's not free speech. So I completely support free speech, but not harassment of the kind that Hamas mask censors are trying to impose on universities.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter, next question is for you. Is Iran the puppet master behind this war, or are they a key to the peace that could happen? In 2025, as Trump reaches out to Tehran, as Iran quietly orchestrating the chaos through its vast network of proxies that have been damaged recently, or could it shock the world by becoming a new partner in peace for the region? Mr. Ritter, you're up first.
I think we need to be careful when we use the term Iran. First of all, understand that in 1947, when Israel was created, 47, 48, Iran wasn't what it is today. Iran and Israel actually used to be allies during the time of the Shah of Iran. It's only when the Islamic Republic manifested itself, 1979, that the current antipathy or even aggression towards Israel manifested itself. Iran is a supporter of the Palestinian cause. Indeed, it's part of the Iranian constitution. Iran has been aggressive in implementation of this support. They have created what is euphemistically called the axis of resistance, leading to the creation of Hezbollah, a militia turned political party in Lebanon, the empowerment of Ansarallah, Houthi tribes in Yemen, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad. All of these were designed to create a resistance front against Israel and, to a certain extent, the United States would see it as a supporter of Israel. So in some extent, Iran and Israel, the Islamic Republic and Israel as it currently exists are incompatible with one another. And there will have to be a change in mindset if there's ever going to be peace with these two entities continuing to exist. I think the Iranians take umbrage at Israel's nuclear program. Many nations take umbrage. I take umbrage at it. I don't believe Israel should be permitted to have this undeclared, unacknowledged nuclear program outside of the management of the international community. I come from a long background of nuclear arms control. But that doesn't give Iran the right to have a nuclear weapon. And so we've got a problem there. I I remember when I spoke to the Iraqi parliament in 2002, trying to get them to let UN weapons inspectors back in. One of their issues was Israel. And I told the Iraqi parliament that you cannot be more Palestinian than the Palestinians, meaning that if the Palestinians are willing to live in peace with Israel and come up with a solution, then Iraq must be willing to do so too. And I would make the same comment to the Iranian government today. Your support of the Palestinian cause is noted. But if Palestine is able and willing to make peace with Israel, then so too must the Islamic Republic. You can't be more Palestinian than the Palestinian people themselves. And so the solution here isn't to solve the Israeli-Iranian problem. The solution here is to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem. And then I believe the Iranian issue will go away.
Thank you, sir. Professor?
I fundamentally disagree. I think Israel could solve the Palestinian problem, and the Iranian regime would still call for the destruction of Israel, because for them it's a theological issue. They do not believe that Jews have the right to govern even 1 inch of land that is land which, under the Sharia, can't be given up and is belongs to the Islamic people. So I don't agree with that at all. I think the Islamic Republic as it exists today is the cause for almost all of the problems in the Middle East, including the fact that they murder their own people, they throw gays off the roof, they hang dissidents in the middle of town, and they just murder people, their own people. The best thing that could happen in the world today, the single best thing that could happen in the world today, would be regime change in Iran, the overthrow of the mullahs and the substitution of a democratic Iran. Iran is one of the few countries in the Middle East that really has the basis for being able to become a democracy. It was not a democracy under the Shah, but it was a more tolerant autocracy, obviously, than it is today. And so I'm in favor of regime change, not necessarily by military means, but by supporting groups that are seeking regime change. I'm also in favor of taking whatever action is necessary to destroy Iran's nuclear reactor. Remember, Israel hasn't acknowledged that it has nuclear weapons. Of course it does, but it has stated publicly it would never be the first ones to use it. And it's had nuclear weapons now for close to a half a century and never used it. The head of the Iranian regime, the former head Rafsanjani, said if Iran were to develop a nuclear bomb and if they dropped it on Tel Aviv, it would be the end of Israel, because Israel's a one-bomb state, and it would kill 3 million Jews and would end Israel. He then said that Israel would retaliate and drop an atomic bomb on Tehran. I'm not sure it would, but he said they would, and that would cause 10 million deaths among Muslims. But he said the trade-off would be worth it. And so there's a complete asymmetry. Israel's nuclear program is defensive. It's designed to prevent another Holocaust. The motto behind the Israel nuclear regime is never again. It will use nuclear weapons only as a last recourse to prevent what happened to 6 million Jews in Germany and Poland, but it will never use it tactically to try to fight against its enemies. So, no, I think regime change is absolutely essential. I think the prevention of Iran from developing nuclear weapons is essential. And I think if we saw regime change in Iran, it would be best for America, best for Israel, best for the Middle East, and most of all, best for the Iranian people. Iran is not a democracy. You can't compare Iran's leadership to Israel's. Israel's was elected, whether you agree with it or not. Iran's was imposed on it. The vast majority of Iranians would be thrilled to see the end of the regime of the mullahs.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter, response?
I think Professor Dershowitz and I are going to be disagreeing on the issue of Iran. Is it a perfect democracy? No, but Iran definitely has a strong democratic institution. Its president is elected through democratic processes. Yes, there is a nomination process that goes through various theological, gates. But the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, spoke about the importance of the participation of the Iranian people in the electoral process, noting that by voting, you are saying that you support the Islamic Republic. This is why the Iranian government has been watching the the trend of fewer people showing up to vote in elections with some concern, because it lends itself to the argument that maybe the Islamic Republic isn't as popular as it once was. But I'm against regime change in any way, shape, or form. I just point to what happened in Iraq and the disaster that's occurred in the Middle East since overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Let the Iranian people decide, just like we've agreed that it's up to Israel to decide what Israel's leadership is going to be as well.
Thank you, sir. Professor, Assad is out, but is Syria really turning towards the West? With Iran's weapons pipeline to Hamas and Hezbollah, long rumored to run through Assad, does this fall cut the cord? Or has Syria's new president, a former declared terrorist now claiming to be pro-West, just taken the network deeper underground?
It's a complex question with a very nuanced answer. The situation in Syria is a lot better today than it was a year ago. You know, we all thought it would be better when the son of the original dictator took over, and it turned out to be worse. Even though he was educated in Great Britain, he was prepared to use chemical weapons against his own people. President Obama committed one of the worst foreign policy blunders in modern American history when he drew a red line in the sand and said that the United States would not tolerate the use of chemical weapons against the people of Syria, and then he did tolerate it. So, but I think we've seen a change now, and the change was brought about in part as a result of what happened on October 7th and Israel's response. I think it's for the better. I don't see it as a panacea. I don't see Syria moving toward a democracy, and I see Syria being a battleground now, possibly, between Israel, the United States, and Turkey. Turkey used to be an ally of Israel. Now it's its most virulent enemy because of Erdogan. And the United States has good relations both with Turkey, Turkey's autocratic leader, and with Israel. So maybe the United States can help bring about some rapprochement. Look, the goal is to try to create a peace not only between Israel and the Palestinians, but between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the way they did it with the Abraham Accords. I was honored to play a very tiny role in some of those negotiations during the first Trump administration, and would be happy to continue to play a role in any possibility of bringing about peace. Look, October 7th was largely, I think, motivated by Iran and by Hamas, because the Israelis were moving toward possibly making a peace with the Saudis and other Arab countries that didn't require necessarily resolving the Palestinian issue. And the Palestinians, through Hamas, said, no, we're not going to do that. In the 30 seconds I have left, I want to make one point in response to a point that was made earlier and about proportionality. Let me state categorically that no country in the history of warfare has ever had a better ratio of fewer civilians to militants killed than Israel during the war in Gaza. And that is, if you take Hamas's statistics, which are completely distorted, the ratio may be as much as 3 civilians to every combatant. If you take Israel's figures, they're more like 1 or 1.5. But even if you take Hamas's figures, they are far less than the ratio in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in other places where Mr. Ritter has been. And so Israel should be commended, not condemned, for taking such enormous efforts to kill as few civilians as possible, and for selfish reasons. Why would Israel ever want to kill civilians? It hurts them enormously, both in Israel and in the court of public opinion. So let's recognize the reality that civilians die during war, but Israel goes to great efforts to try to reduce the number of civilian casualties compared to combatants who live among the civilians and use them as human shields.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter?
Syria. There's an old saying, better the enemy you know than the enemy you don't. And whatever you want to say about Bashar al-Assad, whether you're Israeli and you oppose him from a geopolitical standpoint, or you're a Syrian in diaspora who opposes him because of the crimes that have been alleged that his regime has committed. we knew Assad. We know who Jolani is. He's an Al-Qaeda head chopper. He's a terrorist of the worst order. He's a man with literal blood on his hands, somebody who is such an extreme terrorist that he had a $10 million bounty on his head by the United States State Department. We know who he is. And no matter what you want to say about Bashar al-Assad, he is not Jolani. And yet Jolani is in charge in Syria today, and we've seen the total breakdown. Syria no longer exists as a modern functioning state. It's being carved up as we speak by various occupying powers. Israel has moved in to seize territories in the south. Turkey has made a move. The United States is withdrawing, but who's going to fill that vacuum? I believe Turkey will, because in an effort to suppress the Kurds. Once again, historically, the Kurds come out on the short end of the stick, as they always have. But I would say that, yes, while you can cheer if you're anti-axis of resistance, that the collapse of Syria has dealt a very harsh blow to Iran's ability to continue to supply Hezbollah. It hasn't brought the stability that maybe Israel wanted. I would say, indeed, it's made it even more destabilizing. There are those analysts in Israel who say that it's time to put the Iran project on the back burner because they view the growing threat from Turkey as being more existential in nature because it could put Turkish forces on the border with Israel. And that could become very problematic. So I think that Syria is in a much worse position today. I cannot support Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, HTS, whatever you want to call this. He's a terrorist. He has American blood on his hands, and I frankly believe that he should be dealt with extreme prejudice. And I'll finish this on, I was a targeteer during the Gulf War, and I have been accused by many people of committing war crimes because of some of the targets that I was involved in. I disagree with Professor Dershowitz, but I'm going to say this. This is not the time or place for me to throw allegations at the Israeli Defense Force because I believe that the Israeli Defense Force has a right of due process. They have a right to explain themselves, and I'm going to wait until which time I could have that conversation in a more civil and thorough fashion before I engage.
Thank you, sir. Professor, response for Syria?
First of all, that's commendable to wait till all the evidence is in before you throw stones. I think that's commendable. Indeed, I think the entire debate thus far has been a unique opportunity to have two intelligent, experienced people debate in a rational way that's so rare these days about the Middle East. You mentioned the Kurds, and I want to focus on them a bit. The Kurdish people are entitled to a state far more than the Palestinian people are. They've been promised a state over and over again, the Treaty of Spirides. They have engaged in far less terrorism. There are many more of them. They are distinct, much more distinct from their surrounding Arabs than the Palestinians are from Jordanians, etc. And yet I've never seen a single demonstration in favor of Kurdish independence. What we see instead is what I've written about in my new book called Palestinianism. It's as if the only issue in the world is the right of the Palestinians, as if nothing else matters, and as if the only wrongs in the world are committed by Israel. And so I think until we get off this extraordinary focus only on the rights of the Palestinians and the wrongs of Israel, and focus more on what's going on in Darfur, what's going on with the Kurds and others, we will never be able to really approach the issue of human rights and human wrongs in a rational way.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter, Nasrallah is dead. Is Israel more secure or more exposed now? With Hezbollah's longtime leader gone and Lebanon in political freefall, is Israel finally seeing the collapse of a major threat or bracing for more radical, unpredictable enemies emerging from the chaos?
Hassan Nasrallah was a historically unique figure. He has been the head of Hezbollah since 1992. The longevity alone means that he was thoroughly familiar with the totality of and complexity of the Hezbollah struggle against Israel. He was the head of Hezbollah when Israel was occupying southern Lebanon. He was the head of Hezbollah when Hezbollah evicted Israel from southern Lebanon. He was the head of Hezbollah when in 2006 they had their short war, and he was the head of Hezbollah on October 7th when Hezbollah made a decision to begin what they called a managed campaign of escalation to divert military resources away from Israel's anti-Hamas operation to weaken Israel and to inflict harm on Israel. And he was able to carry out a very effective campaign for nearly 14 months. The Hezbollah forces, say what you want about them, are very effective, especially at the tactical level. Ask the Israeli forces that engaged with them. Nobody really relished the idea of going into the hills of southern Lebanon and hooking and jabbing with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah had very distinct capabilities in terms of long-range strike, weapons, precision strike weapons, drones, etc. But I think Hassan's longevity was also the downfall of Hezbollah. He helped transition Hezbollah away from a purely resistance organization into a political party that now had to take into account the totality of the Lebanese interests, meaning that he could no longer be selfish and say this is only about the Shia of southern Lebanon. The policies that he had to embrace had to deal with the totality of Lebanon, Christians, Sunnis, and even rival Shia factions, the Druze. And so this watered down his militancy, so to speak. And two, it exposed him to be, in his organization, to be infiltrated by the Israelis. And I think one of the things that we saw is that Israeli intelligence was extremely successful in infiltrating Hezbollah's ranks. The pager attack decimated middle management of Hezbollah, and Israel's ability to target Nasrallah in the end showed that Nasrallah's security had been penetrated by Israel. So there can be no question today that Hezbollah's leadership lacks somebody with the experience of Nasrallah, and that Hezbollah is still reeling from the defeat that was inflicted upon it by Israel, by Israeli intelligence. Hezbollah is still a force to be reckoned with, but it's a force that will have difficulty reconstituting its former capabilities, if it ever can, because of the downfall of Syria and the lack of that umbilical cord that connects it with Iran.
Thank you, sir. Professor?
Look, I agree with Mr. Ritter that October 7th was a devastating defeat for Israeli deterrence. It showed the weakness of Israeli intelligence. No intelligence agency is perfect. Look at 9/11, look at Pearl Harbor, look at so many other instances. And the military response was totally inadequate. And it was essential for Israel to restore its deterrence, because the only way Israel survives is if it persuades its enemies that it can defeat it, no matter how many enemies combine together. And so, Israel could have killed Nasrallah many, many times in the years before October 7th. They probably could have killed Sinwar as well, and probably could kill some of the Iranian leaders the way the United States ultimately killed Soleimani. And so Israel waits to see when the occasion is proper. It takes a long time for Israeli intelligence to manifest its work in actual outcome, as evidenced by the pagers and the cell phones. But Israel is sending a very, very powerful message that if you attack it, and it started sending that message when the terrorists killed Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympics. Golda Meir said, "We will kill every single one of the terrorists." They made a mistake. They killed an innocent person along with, I don't remember, 9 or so actual terrorists. But the deterrent impact that Israel sends around the world is very, very powerful. Now, the problem is when you're dealing with ideologues who don't fear death, then the usual deterrence doesn't operate if they really believe their reward is in heaven and that it doesn't matter if they die. If they welcome death, then the traditional deterrent equation doesn't work, which is why Israel has specialized in preventive actions through the Mossad, through the Shin Bet, 1967 war, and other places. Israel needs to use prevention. That's why they bombed the Acerric reactor. That's why they bombed the Syrian reactor. That's why they will maybe ultimately have to destroy the Iranian nuclear program, because they can't wait to deter. They can't wait until millions of Israelis have been killed. And so they move preventively, and that means they sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes they err on the side of too much. Sometimes they err on the side of too little, and they're imperfect. And so what you have to deal with is probabilities. The probability that taking preventive action like killing Soleimani will produce more good than harm. The same thing was true with Nasrallah. The same thing was true with Sinwar. And I think it will continue to be true. I think Israel will continue to engage in preventive actions more than retaliatory and reactive actions.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Ritter, response, 1 minute.
Live by the sword, die by the sword. That's an old adage, a biblical reference. And as I've indicated, at one time I was very pro-Israel, and then I watched Israel change. I remember when I was in Israel in the 1990s, speaking to people responsible for the strategic intelligence threat assessments, that one of the top threats, the number one threat that Israel forecast in the future was radical right-wing Orthodox Jews who were becoming more and more radicalized by the immigration of hundreds of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian Jews who had no understanding of the Palestinian people, no appreciation, didn't know how to live with them, didn't want to live with them. And I think that's where we are with Israel today. I believe the only path to peace is for Israel to learn how to view the Palestinian people and their Arab neighbors as human beings and come up with the solutions that are based in that.
Thank you, sir. Professor Allen, last question of the evening. Trump's Gaza plan, path to peace or power play? Is Trump's vision to rebuild Gaza a real shot at peace, or just a high-stakes move to force the region's hand? Sir?
Trump's a negotiator. I've known President Trump for a long time. I defended him. I was his lawyer. I voted against him in 2016, voted against him in 2020, and I'm not disclosing what my vote was in 2024. But I know him fairly well, and he is at bottom a negotiator. And I think he threw out the Gaza idea as a way of starting a negotiation. He was absolutely right that a return to the status quo ante is completely unacceptable. First of all, Gaza is uninhabitable. We now learn today from the newspapers that many of the buildings have explosive devices in them, that it would be completely unsafe for children and women and innocent people to go back to live in their homes. If there could be a complete rebuilding of Gaza, if Gaza could be turned into a Singapore in the Mediterranean, it's a beautiful place. I've had lunch and dinner in Gaza. I've met people there. The beach is absolutely magnificent. It could be a paradise. And if you can get rid of Hamas and bring technicians, people who are interested only in the welfare of the Gazan people, to control Gaza, even on a temporary basis, we could see people returning. My solution would be very much a variation of Trump's solution, and that is I would first take the southern part of Gaza and try to depopulate it for a period of a year and rebuild it from beginning to end with beautiful condominiums and beautiful oceanfront, and then make sure that the people who went back to live in Gaza were not Hamas supporters. Maybe that's unrealistic that you can really tell the difference, but at least make an effort. And then I would do the same thing in the north. So I would rebuild the entire Gaza. And I think the money could come from the Saudis, it could come from the Qataris. And we have to make sure that there are full, complete, and free elections. I'm worried about what the outcome of elections would be. But I do think if you can treat Gaza the way the United States treated Germany with the Marshall Plan, and the way the United States treated Japan after the Second World War, there is the possibility that maybe you can create a population that is more concerned about its own welfare than about destroying the Jews. And so, yes, I think that the Trump plan was an opening gambit. I would like to see it move in a direction that results in a Gaza that is free of Hamas, that is free of radicalism, and that is really interested in the education, the health, the welfare of the Palestinian people. Then perhaps you can see the beginning of a two-state solution.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ritter?
This can be a boring discussion because what Professor Dershowitz just did is put out a counter proposal, which is what I believe that Donald Trump was looking for when he put out his Gaza plan. His Gaza plan is unrealistic. It's unimplementable. As an American, I could never support 100,000 American troops being deployed to depopulate a region, et cetera. But I don't think that Donald Trump ever intended to implement this plan. He put something on the table that was so extreme that it invited a counter proposal. Why? Because, as Professor Dershowitz has rightly said, the status quo is unacceptable. You can't return to a system that was fundamentally broken, a system that was unable to deal effectively with the Palestinian people and their aspirations prior to October 7th. And now that Gaza has been almost completely eradicated, it's impossible to speak of a United Nations refugee, infrastructure dealing with this issue. Something radically new must come about. I, however, believe that the Palestinian people who live in Gaza have a right to determine their own future. And Professor Dershowitz, I believe when I heard you say you're concerned about elections, that concern might be that Hamas might win the election, that Hamas might be so popular today because of its resistance to Israel that it could win a majority of the Palestinian people's support, which means that democracy under the Israeli calculus could never be part of the current solution, that whatever has to happen in Gaza will be imposed on the Palestinian people. And I think that is going to be extraordinarily difficult. Look, I condemn Israel for what I believe to be its criminal actions in Gaza. And I say criminal because Israel does have a policy of collective punishment. It goes back to the bombardment of the suburbs of Beirut in 2006, where they said, if we can't get Hezbollah, we're going to punish the people for supporting Hezbollah. And I believe that they extended that collective punishment into Gaza. But I also blame Hamas. Hamas initiated an action on October 7th. Hamas took hostages and brought them back into Gaza. What did Hamas think was going to happen? Hamas brought this down on the Palestinian people in the belief that they could break Israel's back, that they could get Israel to back down. That didn't work. And now we have a situation where Hamas may claim military victory, but Gaza is the loser, and the people of Gaza are the loser. The Palestinian people are the losers. And nobody's out there articulating on their behalf. People are articulating about the security interests of Israel, what's good for the region. But where are the people articulating for the Palestinian people? And it's not Hamas. Hamas is a resistance organization that is looking for a one-sided victory against Israel. And it's the Palestinian people that will continue to suffer.
Thank you, sir. Professor, final word?
First, I want to commend this group for bringing together the two of us, and I want to commend Mr. Ritter. I wish we could take this debate and bring it to Harvard, bring it to universities around the world. We're not hearing two sides of the story in a reasonable and nuanced way, as we have, I think, during this debate. I think we have the same goal. We want to see the Palestinian people living in peace and living with dignity and living with their ability to determine their own future. Of course, in the immediate years after the Second World War, the United States would not have allowed a referendum in Germany that would have brought the Nazis back in power. So there is always going to be some limitations on a democracy in a post-war area. But my goal is let's end all the refugee camps all over the West Bank, all over Syria, all over Gaza. Let's create towns and cities where the refugee problem can finally be put to an end. There's a statute of limitations. The refugees have existed largely as a result of the United Nations and of the Palestinian leadership in order to be a festering sore. Let's end that. Let's let the Palestinian people live in peace. Let there be peace with the Saudis. I'm an optimist, and I think that the Palestinian people and the Israeli people can live in peace if only there are changes in the leadership of the Palestinian people. By the way, changes in the leadership of the Palestinian people would probably bring about changes in the leadership of the Israeli people as well. These two operate in common. But my final word are thank you for having this rational debate. This is the first rational debate I've participated in about the Israel-Palestine conflict since October 7th. So you're to be commended.
Thank you so much, sir. And that's a wrap on this edition of Debate Club. One issue, two strong voices, and a debate that pushed us all to think a little bit deeper. Thank you to Scott Ritter and Alan Dershowitz for bringing this fiery debate to life. In a world full of noise, don't just pick sides. Be radically curious. Challenge what you think and keep an open mind. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.